I would pour 1/5 of vodka, or about half of it, into a giant, almost like a protein shaker thing. And I would mix the rest with vitamin water or whatever, because I wanted to keep it half healthy. And I would often do that in my apartment after work, when it was dark, of course, while doing P90X or T25 or Insanity or one of those workouts. I would literally be putting down 1/5 of vodka while doing those workouts to keep the anxiety at bay while I was working out. So that's the extent of the insanity.
We believe that you are strong by design, and you were made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. You're listening to the #1 strength and health authority podcast in the world. So let's get ready to unlock your potential and transform your life in today's episode.
Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Strong by Design podcast show. So great to have you. Thank you for joining us today, for finding our podcast. If you're a first-timer, I'm very excited for the guest that we have today and the power of conversation, as we were just talking about before I hit record, that the things that we discuss today are going to be really very personal and come from a place of a strong desire to help someone else change their life through just honesty and boldness and dropping the superficial and the facades that so many of us kind of walk in and live in on a daily basis. This is going to be a very meaningful, purposeful conversation that's evergreen, and people can come back to for years to find maybe some healing and an opportunity to make a massive change in their life for the better. We've done previous episodes like this with Frank Rich, who's a return guest on our podcast, and he also is helping men break free from addictions to porn. So to be able to have a very kind of similar, I think, conversation when it comes to alcohol and alcoholism and the impact that has, you'll know a little bit about my story too as we go a little bit further in this conversation. So again, first timers, thank you for joining us. If you're a past listener of the podcast, we are just so grateful for you for coming back all these years and hundreds of episodes. It really means a lot to us, and we have so much fun with each of these guests and each of these discussions and conversations that we have. And so it's just truly a blessing for all of us here at Critical Bench to participate in this podcast, and our team all over the world that helps this thing go, that helps make all of the assets and helps us release it. And there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not just the person hosting, that's for sure. So I'm just honored to be part of it. So I'll ask you in advance one thing. If you could, at the end of this very powerful episode today, is think of one person in your life you could share it with. That would mean a lot to me, and I know it would to Chris Scott, our guest today. If you could share this episode with someone who needs to hear what we talk about today and how very real the opportunity is to change. It's right there. It's at your fingertips, and some people maybe just don't feel equipped to do it, or have the courage to do it, or lack the understanding. But I think Chris will really shed some light on things for you today. So share this episode, spread it around so that other people can benefit from the message. So our very special guest today, Chris Scott, joining us. This is a gentleman I got to know a few weeks ago. We had a great kind of, hey, what's up chat in advance of this podcast, just so we were on the same track with what we're going to discuss today. And I think we both felt really great following that discussion, just what we were going to be able to accomplish in this episode. And I know he's going to go deep and get personal with you. He's the founder of Fit Recovery. He helps people all around the world transcend alcohol and optimize their health. He's been addiction-free since 2014. So he's coming into almost a 10-year period of his life where he has overcome something that had complete control over his life. And he is a living testament to what you can do when you work at it. And he's the author of Drinking Sucks, creator of an online course and support community, Total Alcohol Recovery 2.0. He's the co-host of Elevation Recovery Podcast with Matt Finch. He just got done telling me they've taken a little break from, I mean, you guys had like 300 episodes or something, so you're a podcaster through and through. You just needed a little bit of a break. Doesn't mean you can't come back to it someday. So it's great that you finally have some opportunity in life to be a guest on a podcast and still continue to help people with your story. So Chris, welcome to our show, buddy.
Chris, thank you for having me. I love your show, love your mission, and really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, man. You're a perfect example, I guess, of what our show is all about. That we believe that everyone is strong by design, that they have the power to make real change in their life when they're just committed and consistent. And, that is certainly something that you know full well, and things that you've been helping people with for, better part of a decade. Let's go back, if you would, and we can go back as far as you'd like to go back. I want to get to know you better myself, and certainly our audience needs to know and have a better understanding of who you were, the man that you once were, that you had to kind of separate from and put in the rearview mirror. So, what's your story? Tell us a little bit about your journey so that we can kind of come full circle.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it concise. So basically, I was not your typical brown paper bag, with a bottle in it type of alcoholic. And to this day, I actually don't like the term alcoholic, which we can get into. But I think it's an apt description of what I once was at a certain point of time when I was actively drinking and addicted to alcohol. I'd been a perfectionist throughout high school and college. I actually swam competitively in high school and in college. I actually probably swam harder in high school than college. I went to a D3 school after trying to go to a D1 school, ended up working out, but the caveat there was it did make more time to party. So the intensity with which I had once swam and studied in high school and had a very regimented lifestyle kind of transformed with a certain OCD tendency, OCD-like, I'm not clinically diagnosed with that, into drinking, which became regimented. And which I soon found before I graduated from college had become a part of my life that was quite separate from the reasons that other people seemed to do it. I was not just drinking at parties, even in college. I was drinking before, during, and after parties. And by my senior year, I was sometimes drinking whatever remainder I had in my room in the morning to keep the anxiety at bay. And so that was something that seemed to creep up on me. It was so slow as to be imperceptible, the progression there. I didn't go from being a social drinker to someone who drank in the mornings overnight, but I couldn't tell you a date at which it started happening. It was like at some point my brain learned that A, drinking's fun, B, I have anxiety increasingly, trying to figure out most people in college have anxiety about what job am I going to get? Where am I going to go? What's going to happen after I leave my friends who I've made in college? Are we all going to be dispersed and live a sort of alienated, urban, atomized lifestyle where we're, in our own bubbles? And unfortunately, that anxiety became something of a self-fulfilling prophecy for me because of the alcohol, which I didn't recognize at the time. So when I went to work in finance in New York, all of a sudden, less than a year after I graduate from college, I'm more or less sequestered in my apartment on the 34th floor with a beautiful view. I have this glamorous job that I hated, actually, but still, externally, it was a sort of gilded life. And I would work hard, and I would retreat back to that view with a glass of wine as soon as I could after getting my work done. And then that was my regimen. And it's odd to me in retrospect now that I'm a self-proclaimed health nut. And at the time, I thought I was health conscious. I was trying to choose organic foods. I would mess around with supplements, just see an ad and buy something and take it for 2 weeks and forget about it. But I would try. It's odd to me in retrospect that I didn't actually break down what am I doing to my health. And it's odd to me that I never had an education beyond whatever the DARE programs were, where they just try to scare you with consequences that no one ever believes is going to happen to them. But I didn't have an understanding biochemically of what was going on in my brain during that seemingly slow motion train wreck. So by the time I turned 26, things were getting pretty bad. And I was on my second long-term relationship. I spent most of my early to mid 20s in long-term, seemingly long-term relationships, 2 or 3 years, mostly because I was too lazy to go out and enjoy myself, and it was just convenient. Unfortunately, as horrible as that is to say, I hope those nice women are not listening, but it was just convenient for me to have a girlfriend and retreat to my, my view and invite them over and make dinner and pass out and drink and seem like I wasn't drinking alone. So there was still a loneliness, though, that pervaded that. And it, as I said, I performed well at work up to a certain point. By the very end, I definitely did not meet expectations. But by the very end, I nearly lost my mind. And I should say then that the reason I actually decided to seek help when I was 26 is because it was the third day in a row that I physically could not go to work. And I had just had a very bad breakup with, that girlfriend at the time of almost 2 or 3 years, and I was drinking more than usual to get over it, and my usual amount was high. So I had gone from drinking, let's say in college, you go out and have 8 beers or something, and then most people after college kind of taper off, and they can't handle 5 beers very well for very long, and by the time you're 26 or 30, it's kind of become a social thing or maybe a never thing. I have a lot of friends who quit naturally, and maybe they'll have a glass of champagne on New Year's or a sip. But for me, it was never performative. It was never social. It was never a thing. It was me and my own brain. And I was drinking a handle of vodka per day by the time I quit. For people who don't know, like a fifth of vodka is 750 milliliters, and a handle is several times that. So if I bought fifths of vodka often, I would pour 1/5 of vodka, or about half of it, into a giant, almost like a protein shaker thing. And I would mix the rest with vitamin water or whatever, because I wanted to keep it half healthy. And I would often do that in my apartment after work, when it was dark, of course, while doing P90X or T25 or Insanity or one of those workouts. I would literally be putting down a fifth of vodka while doing those workouts to keep the anxiety at bay while I was working out. So that's the extent of the insanity that I was going through. And so naturally, knowing what I know now, and some of which I'll try to share, my brain was deteriorating, my liver was deteriorating, my gut was deteriorating, and my sanity was deteriorating. And I would wake up every night at 3 a.m. feeling like all hell was about to break loose. Like the same feeling of anxiety that you would have situationally if like a nuclear bomb had just gone off or was about to, and only you knew it. That was the sense of impending doom that I had every night for some reason at 3 a.m. And I could drink myself back to sleep, and then it would happen again at 7 or 6 or whenever it was that I had to get up for work. And it got so bad that I couldn't get in my car. I was afraid that I would crash my car, or that I would just get to work and make a fool of myself, and everyone would find out, and it would, my whole hiding the drinking would be up, because it was just, my face looked awful. My head, by the way, was about 30% larger than it is today when I was 26, and I was about 250 pounds. Right now, I mean, I'm not at my leanest now, and I'm 215, maybe 220 if I've eaten pasta the night before. So, it's like that was not good. I was not in good shape. I actually had swelling in my ankles. My liver was tender. If I pressed below my rib cage, it would hurt. I couldn't sit in a meeting without actually digging my nails into my fingers to try to distract myself from the impending panic attack. There was no way I could have done not that I would have been in a position to be invited on a podcast, but I couldn't have done an interview or a podcast episode. And actually the last job that I got hired for, which was the one that I, kind of left when I went into detox, I had drank 3/4 of a fifth of vodka before going in for that interview. I had fully Listerine'd out and had like a sandwich, peanut butter sandwich, to get rid of any alcohol fumes that could be remaining. I killed the interview and I got the job after drinking 3/4 of a fifth of vodka at like 9 a.m. on a Tuesday or something like that. So I was in very, very bad shape. And it was just me, my anxiety, and the alcohol. And that's what was going on. And as I said, up to a handle a day by the time I quit, couldn't go to work. So I actually called my parents, who I've always been very close to. They lived several hours away. They were not aware of what I was doing. When they would visit me, whether I was in New York, and I should mention it, at some point I moved to Atlanta to take another job in finance, thinking that if I got a change of scenery, I could get a handle on the anxiety and the alcohol, which I was wrong about because I had no other information or motivation or habit changes or pattern changes besides just switching my location to a different apartment in a relatively nice part of town with another job and that was relatively glamorous. And so I called my parents and I told them straight up what had happened. They were shocked. They didn't know. They would come visit sometimes. I would have little bottles of alcohol in my sock drawers in case I got anxious while they were hanging out and it wasn't an acceptable time to drink. I would also sometimes, if I was with friends having dinner, I would keep track of where the bar was. So sometimes we'd be eating at a restaurant and the bar was upstairs or downstairs. We'd be seated upstairs or downstairs. And I would say, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I would swing by the bar, go to, upstairs or downstairs, order a triple shot of something, take it, go back to my seat so I could remain calm. So I've been deceiving people for years, and not to hurt them. I had no malice towards anyone. I didn't want to harm anyone. I was just trying the best way, the only way I could, the only way I knew to modulate my biochemistry and this severe anxiety that became more and more frequent the more and more I drank. And so I called my parents, I called my best friends. Luckily, I've always had great friendships. And I think this is somewhat, maybe it's anomalous, but at least it probably goes against the common perception of the alcohol addicted person who's burned all their bridges. With the exception of the bridges that you burn when going through breakups in your early 20s or whatever, I didn't really burn my bridges. I'd had some incidents that were not ideal, but luckily, and by some miracle, I'd never gotten a DUI. I probably should have. I'll be the first one to say it. I was always exceedingly careful, and I've always been pretty risk averse in most situations, except with my relationship with alcohol, which I felt like I had total control of until I didn't. Part of my anxiety was the knowledge that I wouldn't always have control of it, and there was going to be a day of reckoning. So it was almost a relief when that day came, and I had the full support of my parents and my friends. I went to a detox center, and actually I should mention that as soon as I called my parents, they said, we're going to come help you check into the detox center. We're going to help you figure out whatever needs to happen. They're the best parents in the world. And so they did, but when they arrived, I realized like, oh no, I can't drink anymore. What have I done? So what did I do? I went right downstairs and walked across the street and went to a bar. And I disappeared for about 2.5 hours. And I had told my parents I was going to go make some phone calls to tell some more friends what I was doing. And of course I did that. What I didn't tell them was that after that, I went to the bar. I didn't actually know I was going to do that. But I should have figured. And so I did that. I come back. I'm pretty drunk. My dad to this day said it looked like there was a different entity possessing my body when I came back from that bar, almost like I found it mildly amusing. The fact was I was so nihilistic by that point because I felt so defeated by the absence of control over my body and my spirit and my mind that I had no choice but to find all of it rather funny. Because the alternative was that I would break down and cry, and I didn't want to do that. So I vaguely recall, I wasn't totally blacked out, but I vaguely recall that saying like, sorry, haha, I messed up. What are we going to do? And so what we did was we went straight to the detox center. They weren't supposed to accept me until the following morning, but explained the situation. They did do a breathalyzer thing. I can't remember what it was, but it was like 4 or 5 times the legal limit and for driving. So good thing I wasn't driving. And they shot me with Ativan. And all I remember is waking up in a room that was almost like a prison cell in a hospital gown the next morning and feeling really out of it. And waiting in line with a bunch of other people in hospital gowns for a little plastic cup that they would put pills in. I didn't know what the pills were, but I took them. They were benzodiazepines. They had me on Ativan, first the injection, and then I was on a tapered dose for about 2 weeks. I was at that place, which seemed like a mental institution, for a few days. And then they transferred me to the inpatient rehab. And there were some good people there. I was immediately kind of indoctrinated into the standard 12-step approach. And the thing that I found to be nice about that approach, although I'll explain why I later departed from it, was that it seemed like at least there was an absence of judgment, at least on the part of the participants, not so much all of the counselors, although some of the counselors were very nice. But it was like, we're all in this together. We all have the same thing. I can't look at you and say you're any worse than me, and vice versa. And that was kind of a nice thing. I was there for about 6 or 8 weeks. I can't recall because it's all kind of a blur, but somewhere in that range. And I did make some progress there on my psychology, but I felt the whole time like something was missing and like I wasn't being told something. And not on the part, there was no malice, I don't think, on the part of the people running it. But I felt like that this can't be it. It can't be that I have a permanent spiritual disease and that this is an affliction. There, not only is there no cure, but there can't be a cure, and that the only solution to it is going to meetings and praying. I was like, maybe that's the case, but I don't want it to be the case. And I was really, I'd say, hypersensitive and hyper aware of any possible alternative route to transcending this thing as opposed to being mired in it forever. And one of the odd things that I noticed while I was there was that people would go to lunch. We would be bused to this cafeteria, like before and after the free AA meetings that we were bused to. And people would get, fried chicken and ice cream and waffles and, Hershey's syrup all over everything. And within a few hours, they were talking about how their disease was giving them cravings. And I thought, well, this is weird because I knew a little bit about sugar. And I thought, you know what, I really need to make use of the gym and I really need to eat clean at this place, which wasn't easy because it was basically me like eating a bowl of raw broccoli and a bowl stacked with like turkey cold cuts and like a bowl of brown rice. And if they had fruit, I would have some of that. People thought I was weird. Other people were actually saying like, you're going to give yourself an eating disorder if you don't let yourself eat what you want to eat. I said, well, this is what I want to eat. I'm just changing what I want to eat. And there wasn't a lot of understanding there. It was like, why are you being so hard on yourself? And have this ice cream sundae and whatnot. And so I ended up taking advantage of the gym sessions. They would bus people to the gym, to their credit. And I was warned against going to GNC to buy vitamins or protein powder because they said you're going to get cross-addicted to working out and to vitamins and protein powder. So, don't do it. But I guess I'm a little bit of a rebel in some ways. And
But nothing wrong with being addicted to ice cream sundaes.
Yeah, so I'm trying to make sense of all this. I'm still tapering on the benzos in the early part, and my brain's not working totally. But it's like a bizarro universe. Despite, as I say, there were some very compassionate people who were there, and if any of them hear this, I think they know who they are, and I'm grateful to them. Yes, so I did go to GNC. I got some vitamins. I got some protein powder. I got some L-glutamine powder, which, as a lot of bodybuilding people know, or even just general fitness people know, is really good for muscle recovery. It's also good for controlling blood sugar. And what I didn't know at the time and what I found out much later is that L-glutamine combines with vitamin B6 and magnesium to increase your GABA levels. And that was a huge epiphany for me later on because I realized, I had anxiety for so long because I was severely deficient in GABA. And I was deficient in GABA. Maybe I had a genetic predisposition to being deficient in GABA, but also continual alcohol use, especially heavy alcohol use, creates a deficiency in GABA because ethanol is molecularly almost identical to the GABA molecule. So ethanol plugs into the GABA receptor, exerts the same calming effect that you would get from GABA. Now, it also does other things. Ethanol is a complicated molecule, causes a cascade of other neurotransmitter effects and inflammation and whatnot. So it's more sophisticated. It's more complex than GABA. But the brain says, well, this is good enough. We can turn down the dial on natural GABA production because we don't need it every night at 5 p.m. or every day at 3 p.m. or every morning at 6 a.m. or every morning at 3 a.m. when he wakes up. He gives us ethanol. So we don't need to produce the GABA anymore. That was a huge epiphany for me. And it's not just L-glutamine that was important, but I mentioned that because that was the first amino acid that I found that actually had an effect of reducing cravings. And I didn't tie it immediately to the L-glutamine. It took a while. It took probably a few months until I got out of that rehab center, started doing a lot of research on just natural remedies, natural cures for addiction, and just trying everything I could because I knew that there was something there. I knew that A, working out made me feel better, and B, eating better made me feel better, and C, certain supplements, although I didn't really understand what they were or why they worked, also made me feel a bit better. So I'm making a little bit of progress, at least on the physiological front, and trying to put the pieces together. And I came across, I know I'm skipping here just for the sake of brevity. I get out of the rehab center. They actually told me, they said, you have to go to a sober living home or else you're going to relapse. I don't know if they had an arrangement with the sober living home, but I said, hell no, I'm not going there because I know what goes on there. And I also really value my independence, which is kind of a dirty word, thinking for yourself, independence. They always say, don't trust your own stinking thinking. It's what got you in this mess. I hate that cliche. Maybe it's true for some people, but I didn't feel like it was true for the vast majority of people in my circumstance. So I came back actually to my apartment that I was in finance. I rearranged all the furniture, started a new regimen. I was still going to AA meetings at the time, just for the sake of regimen, and I think that was maybe helpful in the very beginning. And I totally rearranged my reward center in the beginning by tying my pleasure to feeling good in the morning. And I drank too much coffee. I got a bit too hyped up. I got anxious, but with the help of the few supplements I had, which were not complete, nowhere near complete, given my current understanding of alcohol recovery and biochemistry, they were enough to at least make me not reach for alcohol out of total desperation. There was a little bit of craving just psychologically because I hadn't broken those habits completely, but I was able to go to the gym, get some stuff done, plan out my life, enjoy the sunrise, which I didn't think was possible by the time I had quit drinking, and just start feeling like I was living a fresh new existence, like I'd been transported into a different plane of reality that was full of mystery and possibility and potential, as opposed to being stuck in a sort of stale, nihilistic, endless loop, which is another way of saying that I'd felt so much pain because of alcohol that a lot of what kept me away from it after that rehab experience was that the pain of trying something new, of developing new patterns, couldn't possibly be worse than the pain of what I'd gone through. So that kept me away for a while.
I have a question. I want to just hit the pause button for just a moment because obviously the word anxiety has come up quite a bit that seemed to obviously increase over the years with the increased use of alcohol, as well as, like trauma or what. And it sounds like you had for the better part of my understanding, a good childhood with loving parents. So you weren't coming from some type of, traumatic childhood experience, not at least not to my knowledge. So do you have any understanding or any insight as to maybe where did some of this, was it the consumption of alcohol that just created this anxiety cycle that you had in your life, or was there a starting point? Was there something in particular that happened that just, kind of spiraled out of control?
That's a fantastic question. I've thought a lot about this, and I think everyone's explanation would be different. Some people do have, awful childhood trauma that can definitely change your brain and lead to perhaps anxiety, and perhaps there's a GABA deficiency there. It could be serotonin, other things going on as well. And just wiring of the brain is different. So maybe the fight or flight response is really enhanced for some people, as it was for me. But yes, I think it's a double whammy. The alcohol consumption over time, especially if it increases, can definitely give someone with no anxiety a lot of anxiety. In my case, I did have anxiety before I ever drank. I remember the first panic attack I ever had. I think I was 13 or 14. And the problem with panic attacks is you don't really know where they came from. But as you said, I had a wonderful childhood with wonderful parents. I had great friends. The only differences that I could say would make my childhood somewhat unique is that I was adopted. I didn't think about that much, and I always knew. I don't remember when my parents told me, so they must have told me young. I'm glad they did that because I was never messed up about it. Never felt like I wasn't loved or wasn't cared for. Never felt like I was any different from anyone else. But I did have and still do have a hearing impairment in both ears. It's about 60% loss. And I used to wear hearing aids briefly as a kid. The problem is it's a clarity issue, not a decibel level issue. So the hearing aids could give me more anxiety by making the auditory junk I was getting louder and more intense, but not easier to decipher. And that was a point of contention with my parents for a while because they'd gone through the hard work of finding an expert in this and trying to help and buying these things, which were absurdly expensive when I was really young. And then I said, they don't work. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that that's trauma, but there is something to that. I'd always had a little bit of a predisposition to social anxiety. I don't have it anymore. I outgrew it. Oddly, I think I outgrew the social anxiety at the same time that my alcohol was increasing. It wasn't because of the alcohol. It was because in college, I finally developed a great circle of friends. I had several good friends in high school, but not like a tribe. I had a tribe of friends in college, and I had a lot of security there. I think one of the reasons for my anxiety, oddly or not, after college was losing that tribe. It's not that, and I'm still in touch with many of them today, but losing them in close proximity and feeling like I'd have to do the same thing all over again, which is not an insurmountable problem. That's a normal life change that a lot of people have to confront. But I remember feeling daunted by that a bit and just feeling like, well, I don't have the dude zone around, like this kind of sucks. Like I'm up here in this apartment. And it wasn't as much anxiety in the very beginning of my working career as it was like boredom and maybe missing that tribe. Because I think a lot now about how did we evolve? What's the proper way to live as human beings? There's a lot about modern society that's inescapable and necessary and involved in trade-offs that we have to make if we want to have nice material things or a job or whatever, but which are not natural. And so one of the things I often think about is how do I find a happy middle ground between what I evolved to do and what I have to do as a member of modern society. And in that case, I made the wrong choice, which was, well, they're not around, so I'm just going to drink in my apartment because I can afford it because I have a nice job. That was an awful solution to that problem. But going back to the anxiety thing, I think it is possible that whatever caused that hearing impairment, and I did have a doctor speculate that it could have been prenatal alcohol exposure, which would have been interesting. And I don't know my birth parents. To my birth mother's credit, she must have stopped or probably stopped at some point. Otherwise, I could have had full-blown fetal alcohol syndrome, which I don't. But he did mention that he suspected that I could be somewhere in the autism spectrum, although not far along enough to have obvious signs of social impairment. But there could be a brain change. Perhaps it was simply less of an ability to produce GABA and maybe a slight disposition towards social anxiety, which I definitely had as a kid. Again, I don't know, chicken and egg type thing. I don't know if that came from being aware of my hearing impairment or if it came from whatever caused the hearing impairment also causing that. So that's the only insight I really have about that. But I can also say that for anyone listening, it's always good to know yourself and to dig into your past, your history, to understand yourself better. But I don't think it's useful to obsess and ruminate about it and let it control your life, because you want to move forward rather than move backwards. And it is, for me, it would have been enough to know how alcohol worked and to know that over time, alcohol does turn the dial down on your natural GABA production, among other neurotransmitters too, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. So you feel worse and worse and worse to the extent that you drink more and more and more. And that was something I had never heard. I had no clue. And if you searched on, I guess maybe it's better now. I'm not the only person out there. I've made some very good friends who talk about nutrition for alcohol recovery, addiction recovery. But at the time, when I was searching for solutions online for my drinking issue or an explanation of what was happening, I would just get the same bland, kind of almost boilerplate stuff that the rehab centers would put out. And it seemed to describe someone's opinion of what was happening to my brain, but it was usually in terms of a vague disease that's progressive. And an uncontrollable urge to drink, which indicates alcoholism. None of that tells me what's going on in my brain. So that's why I became so passionate to try to help other people fill in those missing links of information, and then ultimately fill in the missing links in their own recovery program. And to be honest, that's another term I don't love. I don't love the word recovery. I say I am recovered, because alcohol, to be honest, is not something I think about much, except in the context of trying to help other people at this point. I'm 36 now, and the last decade has been the best decade in my entire life by far. It's been downright magical. Now there's been hard times and great times and ups and downs. But I will say the one thing someone told me in rehab, which thankfully turned out not to be true, they said, your lows won't be as low, but your highs will just kind of be flat. And I thought, well, that's no way to live. Why would I want to do that? I'd rather drink. I found my highs have been way higher, like triple or quadruple higher, ever since I transcended alcohol. And my lows have been, as they said, not nearly as low, because they're not, alcohol, and especially withdrawal, it amplifies negative emotions. So I just don't have those. It's almost like I don't have bad days unless there's a situational reason to have a bad day. But even that I just see as a challenge. And I've also found that from a psychological perspective, and I'm happy to talk more about the nutrients, but being proactive and pulling out the weeds, as Tony Robbins would say, is actually the best antidote to anxiety.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love what you've had to say, and obviously there's been so much in the last, let's say, 10 years in terms of science and studies and things that have come out in terms of alcohol's effects on the brain, or we did a massively popular episode not that long ago, marijuana's effect on the brain, and there is so much to the brain chemistry that wasn't discussed or mentioned or put out there that was easily accessible for us back in the day. The answers, as you said, were very kind of generic and not didn't really give you the answers you were searching for. So it's great that you did your own work. Essentially to figure out what was going on at the molecular level, at the inside the brain, and the clarity that you now have over this almost now decade that's been self-proclaimed best decade of your life, is just because I think you're able to think and move and feel in the world just at a completely different level than you were capable of when you were stuck in this addiction rut. I'm just and thank you again, Chris, for really unveiling things and speaking from the heart and so truthfully, because this is what helps people that are listening right now. Like they're like, they can attach themselves to your story and to some of those different moments of your life. Can you take me through and our listeners through what those initial moments, because everyone's heard of withdrawal and withdrawal symptoms and things, like how were you responding to this newfound alcohol-free life over those first 3 to 6 months? Like, did you kind of go through those different moments of withdrawal? How are you coping with that?
Right. So withdrawal is not fun. And it's really hard to explain to someone who's never had it, and harder to explain it to someone who's never had anxiety. And I know I have some friends who said they've never had anxiety. They felt, on edge or a little nervous for situational reasons, but they've never had actual anxiety. Withdrawal for me and I know everyone's experience might be different, but was always accompanied by anxiety. And there's a reason for that. That tends to be the case for people with alcohol withdrawal specifically. And that's because when you're going through acute withdrawal, which would be within the first 72 hours typically, depending on the severity and duration of your drinking, the amount and how long you've been doing it, you could have symptoms that range from feeling a little bummed out to on edge to totally freaking out to nervous exhaustion, which was my least favorite one. Basically, not being able to get off the couch, but also being so nervous that you want to bolt and run somewhere, but you can't move. That was awful. And that was probably a combination of alcohol's deleterious effects on my energy levels and all the inflammation in my body, but just feeling trapped physically, but my brain was, on fire. I would close my eyes, try to go to sleep, and have what I call brain zaps. So basically it's like maybe I start to doze off for 2 seconds and then zap, I'm back. And that's because biochemically, and again, I should say I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't prescribe drugs. This is all based on my understanding of the brain, based on studies I've read and books. But because alcohol is so similar to GABA and it leads to a plummeting in natural GABA production, there's a neurotransmitter called glutamate, which counterbalances GABA. So the two exist in a sort of seesaw relationship. So if GABA goes up, glutamate tends to go down, and vice versa. So when your natural level of GABA goes down and less is produced, the glutamate goes up. Now GABA decreases electrical activity in the brain, glutamate increases electrical activity in the brain. That's associated with anxiety. In severe cases, it's associated with seizures. So this is why, as we know, some people who try to withdraw immediately, go cold turkey after drinking a huge amount of alcohol, will have seizures. Usually it's glutamate toxicity. It's too much glutamate in the brain, not enough GABA. So why do they give benzodiazepines? Because benzodiazepines, like alcohol, structurally similar to GABA and subs in to increase the GABA activity. Even though you have not enough natural supply, it subs in there to keep the glutamate at bay so that you don't have a seizure. That's why I had to take benzodiazepines when I went to detox. But there were many times, I'm glad you brought this up, that I went through withdrawal on my own while tapering incorrectly or deciding to go cold turkey, which was another incorrect mistake. And I would always think I was being some kind of a hero by, you know what, done, I'm pouring the handles out and I'm stopping. And then I would go through a full day or two of hell. And after the anxiety, usually there was a period of just depression. And again, everyone's different. And I'm lucky that I actually don't know if I had a seizure. I had some brain zaps that were so, and I don't even know what the clinical term for a brain zap would be, but they were so intense that I actually suspect they might have been a minor seizure when I would go cold turkey sometimes, or if I would taper too quickly. And so, tapering, you're just trying to decrease the amount you drink every day. By the time I was drinking a handle, I would try to taper within 2 days, which is way too fast. You probably need a week or so if you're getting off that amount of alcohol. And ideally, that kind of thing's best done under medical supervision. But for someone who's drinking, 3, 4, 5, 6 glasses of wine, those types of people can usually taper down themselves, assuming that they have support and that they know what they're doing and they stay hydrated and all that stuff, cover those basic bases. They can usually avoid the worst withdrawals. And honestly, and I don't want anyone to take this as scientific fact, always consult your doctor, but most people who aren't drinking, more than 8 drinks a day or 10 or whatever are not going to have serious complications if they did quit cold turkey, but it's still stupid and they shouldn't do it and they should go just in case. You never know you could have a very fragile body and be malnourished and not handle withdrawal well. So it's always best to go the professional route. But I can say from my experience, there were plenty of times I went from 10 to 0, shouldn't have done it, had that first period of anxiety that lasted a few days. And then after that comes what they call post-acute withdrawal. And post-acute withdrawal is something that can last for up to a year for people. It's the brain attempting to reach some kind of homeostasis after the initial addiction and acute withdrawal period. And there are different causes for it. Your brain and body are dealing with all of the inflammation and toxins created by alcohol. There's something called dynorphin, which floods the brain as a response to the endorphins that are released by drinking. Dynorphin's like the opposite of endorphin. It makes you feel worse. It dampens pleasure. But that's the counterbalance to endorphins. Those can stay in your system for a few weeks after you drink, depending on how much you drank. And this is true even for someone who doesn't have an addiction. So if you've ever noticed that you had a period of drinking a little too much and then you stopped, but you felt bummed out for a week or so, that could be dynorphin. There's also acetaldehyde, which is when your liver processes alcohol, it turns it into water. Acetic acid and acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde's highly toxic, damages every cell in your body. And it can take a while for your body to deal with the acetaldehyde. Usually it's out by a couple days, but then the inflammation and the cellular damage done by the acetaldehyde. We also know that alcohol shrinks your brain over time, literally. And so and part of that's hydration, but part of it could also be brain damage. Luckily, it seems to be reversible. We know the brain has way more neuroplasticity than we once thought, or the adult brain at least. So you can heal from that. But all of this takes a lot of time, is what I'm saying. So post-acute withdrawal involves all of that, plus the fact that your brain is not simply going to turn on your neurotransmitter production, the feel-good chemicals like GABA, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, among others. It's not going to go to normal overnight. It takes time. And especially for people who don't have a perfect diet, which is the vast majority of people, it can take a very long time because you need a lot of protein. You actually need a lot of protein for the liver to recover. And then you need a lot of amino acids for those neurochemicals to get back into balance so that you feel like a human being again. And the good news is that I found with what I call nutrient repair, and again, I'm not a scientist. I didn't come up with nutrient repair, but I came across these studies by Dr. Kenneth Blum. There's a fantastic book by the late Joan Matthews Larson called 7 Weeks to Sobriety. Julia Ross has done great work. She has a book called The Mood Cure, which kind of indirectly touches on addiction. And all of those studies, and there are plenty more, but those are just a few resources that I came across after getting out of the rehab experience and figuring out what was going on in my brain. Basically, amino acids that are precursors for those feel-good chemicals can be taken in various dosages depending on your needs. And if they're combined with the right cofactors, which would be vitamins, minerals, things that basically have enzymatic activity and helping promote the synthesis of those neurochemicals along with the basic building blocks, the amino acids, then you can actually increase those levels of feel-good chemicals quicker and feel better quicker. And so that became my mission, to just disseminate what I just said over the last 2 minutes, hopefully with a megaphone to the entire world. Like, if you're feeling awful, try this, you'll feel physiologically better. And then of course people will say, well, all right, maybe it helps reduce post-acute withdrawal, but you're not curing addiction. And I would say, well, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm happy to have that one. But I do also embrace the biopsychosocial spiritual model. And I think the bio stands for biochemical. But my position is, you may as well feel as good as you can and have as much energy and natural optimism and endorphin activity as you tackle this fresh new period of life, rather than wait for that and try to grind through feeling like crap. And what's the point? How are you going to meditate if you have the equivalent of like adrenaline and cortisol and glutamate poisoning your biochemistry? So, yeah.
That's right. It's kind of like someone arguing that walking doesn't help fight depression or something. And it's like, well, I could probably tell you 20 reasons why probably just walking does have a positive effect and can help you fight depression without looking at a study to verify it. My only real experience that, like firsthand experience, and as I cited when we spoke previously with alcoholism and the power of it, was with my own father. And I told you, he was a high functioning professional. He was actually, and what's so funny is, not funny, but it's an odd coincidence that you struggled with a hearing issue as a young person. My dad was an audiologist. My dad was a hearing aid specialist. He had his own practice for many, many years, and he worked specifically with people, obviously, with hearing impairment. And so my whole life was seeing people with hearing aids, and it just became normal to me. Like looked like a pair of glasses to me, right? It's so funny how I think kids, it's almost, and I'm sure there is some psychology there to the fact that you had a hearing issue and you needed hearing aids, or at least wore them at some point. But the perception that people had that differed from eyeglasses to hearing aids, it's almost like, oh, hearing aids, there's something wrong with you. Whereas people don't think that when they see eyeglasses.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's some odd subconscious thing that played into your childhood with that, with that anxiety. But getting back to really why I mentioned my dad, because, my dad was very much a disciplinarian. He was very abusive physically and emotionally for my brothers and I and my mother. But also another thing that I didn't really ever give much consideration to was the lack of nutrition. And when you replace good nutrition with your addiction, with the drinking, with the half a bottle of vodka or gin every single day, there's not much. That's your focus. That's your that's your baseline. That's your foundation. And the food, it was just secondary. Nourishing the body. My dad died at 62 years old. I don't think just because of alcoholism, I think, and depression, but I think also malnourishment. I think his body did not have very much to go on because of the decades and decades of drinking and the impact that had, and the lack of nutrition, focus on nutrition. So it just goes to say, like what you were saying earlier about, absolutely, you're setting yourself up for success if you're trying to combat this addiction that has complete control over you. If you're at least managing and having some control over your nutrition and focusing there, absolutely, that's going to have some kind of positive effect on your ability to fight and deal with this addiction that is like totally controlling you. So I love that distinction. I don't think a lot of people put much, give that much thought, but to me, it makes just perfect sense. My dad was dominated by his desire for booze and food and nutrition and everything else that really is that water and food is what keeps us alive beyond breathing. It was just completely replaced with alcohol. So I'm glad that you touched on
one
that.
of the things that scared me when I was looking at studies on alcoholism, alcohol recovery after rehab was the morbidity statistics for people who had drinking problems were very high, even if they quit. And so that led me to believe, like, all right, even if you stop, like, that's not enough to catch up to the general population. And there are a number of reasons for that. Obviously, some people are dying of cirrhosis, which would be a very unfortunate and awful way to go. But that would be directly tied to alcohol. But it's not just that. Obviously accidents and such, which could result from maybe having depression or suicides or higher. But it's also things like cancer and diabetes. When I was in the Detox Center, they did some blood tests. They said you're pre-diabetic. And that was shocking to me. But it shouldn't have been, because alcohol is a highly refined sugar and causes, affects insulin. And I was also eating crap, especially when I had been drinking. So my diet wasn't nearly as good as I thought it had been. When I was sober, which became an increasingly rare occurrence over the years, I would eat very well, but I probably don't remember half the things that I ate in my 20s, to be honest. So yeah, that wasn't good. And so, yes, I was very into micronutrients just for the sake of hopefully reducing my risk of cancer or heart disease or any other inflammatory conditions. And as we know, most, if not all, conditions are inflammatory conditions, and alcohol, especially in huge amounts, causes a lot of inflammation. But yeah, that's very sad. I've heard a lot of stories similar to your story about your dad. And it seems also, sometimes, and I wouldn't want to speculate about that situation, but when there's a decreasing control over one's life, sometimes that can be channeled into anger. And for me, as I said, I had this weird way of channeling my intense grief and sadness of my situation into thinking it was funny in a nihilistic way. And it wasn't funny at all, but that was the only way I could cope with it. I didn't typically get angry, but I see how that could have happened. And I think if I had kept it up, that definitely could have happened. And I've worked with a lot of clients who have had that. But I want to return to the issue of diet and supplementation, because I think there is a perception about supplementation that it's just something that makes your pee yellow, health nuts do it. And luckily, I think that perception's been changing over the years. It kind of feels like I've been partaking in a zeitgeist that's much bigger than me. We've got other podcasts such as yours. We got Joe Rogan talking about the benefits of targeted supplementation, and he takes Alpha Brain before his show, and he's talked about how those are precursors for some of the excitatory neurotransmitters that help him stay focused if he's doing MMA commentary or doing his podcast. And I just want to say, yes, that's what I'm doing, except for at this point I'm kind of in maintenance mode, and I've been there for a while, but I was trying to increase the activity of my neurotransmitters so that I could just feel human again, and then start to move into a phase of performance optimization. And also, it's not just those particular precursors, it's just general health and wellness. I take beet powder every morning. I have for years. I feel different if I don't take it. If I'm traveling and I forget my little thing of beet powder, I try to go to a Whole Foods, get some beet, just pure beet juice, increase the nitric oxide, reduce my blood pressure. That's another thing that I had a very common health issue with people who drink too much is high blood pressure. And that's related also to the amount of adrenaline and cortisol and glutamate activity that's going on in someone who drinks heavily and chronically. So blood pressure was something else I wanted to get under control. So I take a number of things for that are all natural. I take hawthorn extracts, and I take that every night before bed. Magnesium was huge for me for a number of things. I should mention, magnesium was the first thing I found after L-glutamine that had a huge impact on me almost immediately. And I think I took half a gram of it. And that was the first night I actually slept through the night. And it was 3 months after I got out of rehab, because they had sent me home with something called trazodone, which is a sleeping pill. I think originally it was supposed to be an antidepressant. And that made me weird. I felt not good taking it. So that gave me more impetus to look into natural remedies. And it was all I needed really in the beginning was the L-glutamine and the magnesium just to get to baseline. And then to get from baseline of feeling human to feeling actually good, I needed the other micronutrients and amino acids in conjunction with diet. So it's not like either or. It's not like diet or supplements. In the same way that it's not like diet or supplements or sunlight or fresh air or exercise. It's all of the things have a synergistic effect with each other.
Yeah, no doubt about it. As you had alluded to there, or we had alluded to earlier, was it's never just one thing, right? It's the combination of things, just what added up to your anxiety. It wasn't one thing that you can put your finger on, that's it. It's this was going on and this was going on. It's like if you throw a bunch of rocks into a pond and those ripples are going to kind of overlap and mix into each other, right? It's just what creates our story. And our story's multi-layered, right? And so there's a lot going on there. But that's why it's having reflection and writing things down and thinking about things in your life and logging and journaling things like that. These are very helpful tools to uncovering things and discovery with where you're at. Obviously, increased protein intake was huge. So beyond some of the things you mentioned, like beet powder and glutamine, magnesium and zinc pair obviously very well, especially at night for recovery and for sleep. Increase, I'm sure, an emphasis on protein, not just from food, but also maybe some supplementation there, where you were trying to drink a protein drink or post workout drink, or just kind of throughout the day? Would you just sneak some extra in? Because I think that's where a lot of us fail as guys who want to be strong and have muscle. Is we think we're doing good, but unless you're logging it and tracking it, you realize like, wow, I'm coming up short. It's really hard to eat protein, to eat enough. So you kind of do need to supplement.
So, I mean, I've experimented with all sorts of diets and protein supplements, protein drinks, powders, etc. I've probably done it all over the last 10 years. And I think everyone has a different solution for their own body and biochemistry. My genetic type, it's kind of weird. None of my friends share this. All my friends seem to be naturally ripped, but they have trouble maintaining muscle and strength. Whereas I'm the opposite, seems genetically, where I don't lose strength. It's like I'll get PRs after not lifting for 2 months. Makes no sense. But I will develop a layer of adipose tissue over everything that I have. And if I'm not careful, I like to eat carbs and I will not turn down a homemade lasagna. And so then when that happens, I end up.
That's called an idiot. If you turn down a homemade lasagna,
so I don't want to be an idiot. So then I end up with this layer of fat over an otherwise, Adonis-like physique. But it's not Adonis-like at the moment. But it's light years from where it was when I was 26.
We're in the same boat, buddy. You know what? We're big and strong, but I don't make a living with my shirt off. So I'd rather have homemade lasagna when it's around.
But yeah, as far as the protein, it's super important, especially for people who have had addictions or have mental health issues. I'd say, I don't want to put a number on this, but I'd say a certain percentage of the time, people who have depression, anxiety, alcohol addiction, if all they did was increase double the amount of protein that they're getting, because most people don't get enough, they would find themselves feeling better. That's because they would get more of these amino acids, of which a lot of them are in meat or in eggs or in pea protein or whatever you like to have, hemp protein. I am definitely partial to like free range, organic meat, grass fed if I can get it, if it's beef or lamb. I eat a lot of eggs. I don't know if I'm falling for a very sophisticated marketing trick, but I get these blue eggs at the stores around here with really bright orange yolks. I'm hoping that they didn't put something in there to make it orange, but I swear to God, they're way better. I have a relationship with my farmer's market, so I'm always buying lean meats and fish and eggs and everything I can get. Sometimes I'll chug 6 eggs just raw. Sometimes I'm a big fan of having omelets in the morning. And for me, it's really about minimizing the carb intake to just what I need to get through the day rather than, and I don't obsess over it. I don't track it against, I don't either make a living with my shirt off, although I'd like to not have to run past the mirror when I go to the bathroom at night. So it's more for me that I know if I eat too many carbs or junk, and I don't really eat junk anymore unless it's a special occasion, or someone made homemade lasagna or carrot cake. But if I keep the carbs low, then they're not crowding out the protein. And if I were lifting a lot, and I should say I did a lot of heavy lifting, like deadlifts were part of the cure or part of my transformation that allowed me to transcend alcohol. I'd kind of had a strong upper body, and I ignored leg day, at least until after the alcohol debacle. And so when I started over from scratch, I said, I'm not doing upper body stuff or I'm not like allowing myself to do it every other day until my legs come up to par. So I really focused on deadlifts. I got my deadlift really high, but then I got to the point where I lost some flexibility. So I transitioned into yoga and into MMA. I still do deadlifts, but no more than once a week. I probably lift no more than twice a week. I used to lift every single day. And honestly, my physique was more impressive back then, but I like that I have new skills. I really love doing yoga at least twice a week if I can. And I find that to be useful for mental health. So I probably don't have the same protein requirements that I had when I was trying to build muscle all the time, but I still burn a lot of calories doing MMA and doing the lifting that I do. And so for me, if you're struggling to increase protein, I think it is possible to get it from natural foods. But if you're not like me and you don't like to eat everything in sight, and I have some friends like this too. One of my best friends, he's built like Hugh Jackman or something. He's ripped, But he always says, like, eating's annoying. He's like, I forget to eat. Sometimes he won't eat for 2 days because he just forgets. I'm like, I don't know how you do it. Like, I've gotten into the fasting thing. I can do like an eating window, but I am so excited when it's time to eat, it's time to eat. But some people,
Yeah.
for those
Yeah.
people, maybe it,
Yeah.
it does help to get some high quality protein supplement or drink. I will say that I was actually traveling last weekend and I went to a Gold's Gym, which I hadn't been to in a long time. And they had the refrigerator. I needed some protein. My eating was off because I'd been traveling. And I got this, I forget what it is. I used to like them a lot, but it's whey protein isolate. I think it's clear, but it's like they're blue or yellow or whatever.
Probably the HSN brand there, the
Could be.
IsoPure.
Yes,
probably
IsoPure.
something.
Yeah. And so I used to like those a lot in college. I would chug those. But now I've become such a snob with nutrition. I'm like, what is this? Like yellow 5 and like aspartame? Like there are these things that I would never put in my body now.
Right.
And I don't know. I guess everyone has different goals. I tend to avoid the artificial ingredients more now. I feel like I'm more aware of that. So yeah, if I could find some like organic whey protein or something, if I needed the protein, which I probably don't, but that's what I would do.
Wow, that's great. Well, it's very beneficial, I think, to people looking for some answers and alternatives. To kind of fight back with maybe with this addiction. And I'll ask this question because I'm sure there's some people listening that maybe themselves don't feel like they're addicts, but they enjoy a wine, they enjoy a beer, myself included. I don't feel I'm the son of an alcoholic. I'm the son of a man who was absolutely controlled and manipulated by the booze, and lived his life drinking every day. I don't drink every day. Most days I don't even think about it, but I come home from baseball practice with my son and I want a cold beer, I'll have a cold beer. But it's oftentimes it's one. Right now there's probably people questioning, do I have a problem? What's the dividing line, would you say, between somebody that's, just casually having it and it's fine, it's really not impacting their life negatively, versus, you've gone over the edge?
That's a fantastic question. And I won't give as boring of an answer as I might have found on the internet when I was Googling the question. The first thing I'll say is I'm not a prohibitionist, and I'm also extremely skeptical of the disease theory of addiction, which is not to say that I'm skeptical of the severity with which it impacts people's lives. I, as much as anyone, understand how severe the problem can be. So asking yourself, am I an addict or not? I think it's still useful to keep that limited to your present state. If you're acting like an addict, and if you have negative consequences all over your life, including your health, then you're probably addicted, to alcohol. If you can't take a break from it without obsessing about it. I think that addiction is a multifaceted issue. There are biochemical factors, there are psychological factors, there are spiritual factors, there are social factors. And that kind of goes back to my biopsychosocial spiritual blueprint for getting out. But I think there are also causes that correspond to getting in. I really don't think anyone is born an addict or an alcoholic, that would depart from the mainstream and accept, and who knows, possibly even like the CDC and all the other people at fancy universities. But I don't think anyone's born an addict. People will say, well, it is more common to find people who develop addictions in families where that's already happened. I would say, yes, there might be predispositions towards increased tolerance, and I think that was probably the case for me. I could always outdrink my friends. The metabolism of alcohol could have a genetic, there's something there in some combination of genes. I doubt we'll ever isolate one gene because that's doesn't tend to be how it works. But there's some combination of genetic factors that allowed me probably to metabolize alcohol much quicker and possibly to experience it as more pleasurable, maybe release more dopamine in response, maybe turn down my GABA further afterwards. So there are certain things that I think you could probably isolate And God knows in the next 10 years or two, we could have some sophisticated AI saying, yeah, here are the genes involved and here's what's going on. I still don't think that identifies addiction or alcoholism as a disease per se, for reasons I won't fully get into. I'll just say that typically with a disease, there's a malfunctioning of tissue that's somewhat predictable, and there's not that. You have brain scans for people who have addictions, and typically, you see the one, it's like before or non-alcoholic and then alcoholic, or someone addicted to Coke, someone not addicted to Coke. But they also look different if you take a brain scan of someone who doesn't know how to drive a taxi and someone who does. But taxi driving, last time I checked, is not a disease. The brain's so plastic, it changes all the time. Yeah. And also, this is something we can change by changing our patterns of choices. So free will can enter the equation here. And I don't think that you can't use free will to cure yourself of diabetes. Maybe you can. I mean, the mind-body dynamic is an extremely complicated thing. So I guess we're getting really deep into the weeds here. But I will say, if someone is wondering, do I have a problem with alcohol? And I think that's probably how I would frame it. Most people who ask themselves that and who might even pause, if you ask them, is it causing damage to your body or your relationships or your life, probably could have a problem with it. But I don't think that people say alcohol addiction or all addictions are progressive. I've helped people who have had mild to moderate addictions arrest it and either drink infrequently or quit, depending on what they want to do. And I'm not a prohibitionist, nor am I a proponent of alcohol. I'm totally neutral. I believe in free will. I believe in health and fitness. And I also believe that for me, what ultimately allowed me to transcend alcohol was taking control of my biochemistry, taking control of my priorities, and proactively making it such that alcohol went from my top priority at all times, in all situations, because of the false belief that it was the only thing that could cure my anxiety. So once I understood what was going on, the game was up there, but I still had to fix my biochemistry. From the top priority at all times to the 10th priority to the 50th to the 100th to off the list, such that now there's no situation in which I could ever say I need a drink. And 10 years ago, every situation could be twisted into I need a drink. Yes. So I think that's the hope there. But it does, for me, fixing my biochemistry proactively was huge in allowing me to gain the mental clarity and the optimism and the energy and the rest that I needed, the regenerative rest, in order to tackle the problem. But I also think that there is a large psychological component here, and that people can take control of their lives. And I don't think control is a bad thing. I think we're happy to the extent that we have control over certain aspects of our own lives. It's not the same as being a controlling person, but control has become a dirty word in a lot of mainstream rehabs and recovery programs, which I think is odd. Because I'm happy now. One of the reasons I'm so much happier now than I was 10 years ago is that I control my schedule more. Now I have certain obligations to people, and I have 2 dogs and whatnot. And I know people say, you're not married yet, just wait. Okay, fine. But I operate with a certain sense of, my executive ability to control what I'm involved in. And so it used to be like, oh, I have to go to this thing and these people suck, so I got to drink. It's like, now it's like, well, I'm just not going to go to the thing. It's liberating.
Right. That's right. And you could substitute the word control, because I do hear you. The connotations of life, how words take on new meanings as time goes on. You could use a phrase like life management or something. Like you're able to manage your life better. Versus control or having control of your life. For those people out there who maybe are fighting against that word or that term. But one thing I'll add on, and I feel like this seems to be the case, is that when we do things in secret, or when we get to a place where we're hiding actions in our life or activities in our life, that's where I feel like it's gotten into the danger zone or into the red zone a little bit. When there's things that you're doing away from everyone else, so that they don't see you doing that. They might see you drinking socially, as you said, but you would do extra drinking on your quick trip to the restroom just to get some extra drinking in. My dad used to sneak in, he used to bring a cooler everywhere he went so that there was always alcohol accessible to him. So if he had to step out to his vehicle or go, I got to take a call or I got to go do this or check on that, there was always something that he had access to. It was always available to him. And I think that's part of it. If it always has to be part of the plan, if it always has to be built into the equation, if wherever your destination is, it needs to have alcohol present, otherwise it's not a good time, or you don't look forward to it, or you can't stay very long, then yes, you have a problem. That's kind of my summation of, is it a problem or isn't it? I can go anywhere and do anything with my family, with my friends, and whether there's drinking or not, I can still really enjoy myself. And that's not the defining aspect of the experience.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've had some clients who were not sold on quitting, but they wanted to get better. They wanted to take a break. And that's fine with me. I'm not here to tell people what to do with the rest of their lives. I'm here to help people feel the physically and mentally best they can, so then they can go make their own decision and take control of their own lives. And I've heard it more than a few times. People take an extended break and they'll do nutrient repair. And oh my God, this is great. I felt so good this morning. I felt better this morning drinking my tea than I did drinking a bottle of wine 2 months ago. I didn't know it was possible to feel this good. And then a few months later, they go somewhere, they have a drink just to see what it's like. And they say, Chris, I think you ruined alcohol for me. I said, what do you mean? And this happened multiple times. And they'll say, it just didn't feel as good as before. And I said, well, do you think it's possible that part of your pleasure was actually the placebo effect? That you were associating alcohol with you were giving alcohol unearned credit for the fun that you were already having at those events with your friends. And so, and also you're missing the intense buildup of dopamine release, anticipation, seeking, reward that you were getting from ruminating for, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. about that drink. You were building it up as this big thing, and then all of a sudden giving your brain permission to release those feel-good chemicals at that time. So when you remove the alcohol from that equation and you still feel great and have a good time, the game is up for alcohol next time you do it. Now, some people decide to quit. That's both an argument for why some people can actually moderate their drinking, and an argument for why you don't need it.
It's great. Thank you for that insight. I think that's really helpful to people listening, because I think all of us have vices, if you will. I think that's always a good word. There's certain things in our lives. I'm definitely a bit of an over consumer of coffee in the morning, and I don't like a morning without coffee in it. Am I addicted to coffee? I guess you could say that I am. Is it having a negative effect on my life? It's not ruining relationships. It's not making me late for work. It's not making me be nasty to my wife or my kids. So there are things like you and I are a little predisposed to exercise. And you could even say I'm an addict for strength training. But I don't think it has any negative consequences other than some sore muscles for a few days afterwards. So, I think it's for each of us to make those determinations and just actually be honest with ourselves and look ourselves in the mirror and then have a good support system. Which is obviously we haven't touched on that very much, but I want you to maybe mention that in the work that you've done and continue to do with courses, live events, that podcasts, YouTube, all the different stuff and resources that you've created. Where can people go to start to, get more familiar with you and all the work that you've done over this last decade? Go ahead and put some of those out there for us.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. I guess the easiest thing is to go to fitrecovery.com. And that's my website. Started off as a really small blog back in 2014. And now I think we've got a free challenge up there. We might be introducing something else by the time people listen to that. But yeah, we've got a free challenge that gives out some cool information for people who are trying to control alcohol naturally. That's where also you can find out information about my online course. I have not been particularly active on social media. That is also something I'm hoping to change. I've got a couple supplement companies, as you know, that I'm working on, and that's been taking up a lot of my time. But we'll see where the social media goes. Maybe I will make a living from having my shirt off and doing workouts on there. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I am on Instagram. I'm not. I would not suggest sending messages because I have not posted on there in a while. But yeah, so I won't actually even mention that. The best place to find me is fitrecovery.com at the moment. I will say that we have around 25,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel, which is just the Fit Recovery YouTube channel. So if you Google or YouTube Fit Recovery, then we'll come up, and we'd love to have you subscribe.
Yeah, you have some great presentation style content that's up there from past events that you've held. So I think that takes a lot of what we discussed today further with the kind of the science and the brain chemistry and your real experience and all that research time that you devoted to this in your recovery process. Some great videos there with tens and hundreds of thousands of views for people to hear more from you. And it's free. It's a great free resource. But yeah, on your website, you have this 10-day free challenge to take your power back from alcohol. So I think that's a really great kind of nice, easy entryway for people who are maybe, want to explore this a little bit, or maybe share this with someone in your life who maybe this is what they need. But of course, sometimes people don't receive this type of help very well. So be delicate with maybe how you share this with somebody. Maybe have the conversation first before you start sending links to them to watch videos of Chris. But that obviously that's a whole nother discussion, right? How to even explore this conversation with someone you love who you feel might have an addiction. But maybe that's a good conversation for us to have down the road in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I would love to. Yeah, we don't do interventions. Unfortunately, it's hard to do an intervention on the internet.
Yeah.
And I'm also skeptical of the efficacy of most interventions that are done. Mm-hmm. However, what I often find is now, especially now more than probably even 10 years ago, people who suspect they might have a problem and have some gradual encouragement to try to look into it, careful, tactful encouragement in that direction will end up searching for things online. And so that was the essence of what I was trying to do from the very beginning, writing blog articles and then putting out YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of free resources, as you've said. Yeah. And one of the videos, if people want to go on YouTube, it's how I quit drinking by rebalancing my brain chemistry. I know that's a mouthful, but if they want to Google that, I do go into depth about some of the particular supplements and more information.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. I watched several minutes of it, and I was like, wow, I'm learning a lot here, and I'm just, it's really, really beneficial, I think, to anyone who's searching for some answers, and it's great guidance for those folks out there. So I really can't thank you enough, Chris, for opening up, as I said, and your honesty, your testimony, your story. There, someone listening's hurting or has someone in their life hurting from this, and maybe just this podcast, as I said at the start, can help them start to, pave a new way, create a new path in their life that's free of alcohol, or at least makes it more of a manageable thing that where they can kind of get their life back. Sobriety is a good thing, and being clear-headed and it leads to better relationships and a better work life and a better better friendships and things. So this is very, very helpful for me, and I know it was for some people on the other side. Please share this episode with someone who could benefit from Chris Scott's story. I'm certain that that this will change a life, and that feels good. And you should feel good about that, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you having me on. You're a pleasure to talk to. I appreciate you being transparent as well. But a lot of fun. I'd love to do this again.
Yeah. Oh, we definitely will. I think there's a lot of opportunity and room for us to explore this and go deeper in a few areas. So this was great. Thank you, listeners, for coming back, or if you're new, for joining us today. And we hope to have you back next week with a new episode releasing every Wednesday here on the Strong by Design podcast. We love you. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to the Strong by Design podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe so that more people can find out about our show. Plus, you don't want to miss any future episodes with the amazing guests and topics we have lined up for you.